Beyond the shouting match. Unlock real understanding with the conversational superpower of street epistemology. What a title, right?
It's a mouthful.
It is, but it really grabs you. And the other one, Bridging the Divide, a framework for understanding moral differences. And what really struck me was how they both tackle this whole issue of disagreement, but from these kind of different angles.
Yeah.
It's like they complement each other, don't you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like one gives you the practical tools,
Like how to actually have those tough conversations.
Exactly, yeah. And the other dives into like the deeper reasons why we disagree in the first place. Like, where do these beliefs, especially these strong moral ones, even come from?
It's like getting under the hood, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Figuring out the mechanics of it all.
Yes.
And so for this deep dive, that's exactly what we're going to do with you, our amazing listeners. We want to give you some real actionable insights into why people see things so differently, especially when it comes to those moral beliefs that everyone seems to hold so strongly. And more importantly, how we can move beyond just shouting matches.
Yeah.
How can we have conversations that lead to something more productive, to actual understanding?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely. It's not about winning an argument.
It's about building bridges, connecting with people, even if we don't see eye to eye on everything.
And when you think about it, that's what builds strong communities. It's that ability to understand each other.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's jump into the first source. This whole concept of street epistemology, or SE for short. Have you heard of this before?
Oh, yeah, I've come across it.
It's so fascinating. It's not about attacking someone's belief, like saying you're wrong. It's not about the what. It's more about the how. Like, how did you even arrive at that belief in the first place?
It's like a gentle investigation.
It is. And the book talks about these key figures, Peter Boghossian and Anthony Magnabosco.
Yeah, they're like the big names in SE.
And they use this method of questioning, kind of like Socrates, right?
Exactly. It's about asking these really targeted questions to help someone examine their own thinking process.
Not to put them on the spot or anything.
No, not at all. It's more about guiding them to uncover like the underlying reasons and assumptions behind their beliefs.
I love that. And you shared an outline of the core questions. And honestly, they're so simple, but so powerful.
Yeah, they really get to the heart of it.
So the first one is all about confidence. How confident are you in this belief?
It's a great starting point. It's just trying to gauge like how strongly someone holds on to that belief. And it's interesting because sometimes people are way more confident in their beliefs than the evidence actually supports.
It's that thing where you think, oh, I must be right because I feel so strongly about it.
Exactly. And just asking that question can sometimes be enough to get someone to start thinking a little deeper, like, maybe I'm not as certain as I thought I was.
It's a nudge in the right direction. And then we move on to the what and the how. So what are the main reasons you hold this belief? And then how did you arrive at that specific reason or conclusion?
These are where things get really interesting.
Yeah, this is where you really start to unpack things, right?
Totally. Because you're encouraging the person to articulate not just what they believe, but the reasons behind it, and also how they got there. Like, what steps did they take? What experiences shaped their thinking? And often, this process can reveal things they haven't even consciously considered before.
It's like shining a light on those hidden pathways in our minds.
It is, yeah. It can be really illuminating.
And then the final question, this one is so clever. Is that method, the way you arrived at that conclusion, a reliable way to determine truth in general?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Because it's not just about this one specific belief anymore, is it?
No, it's taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture.
It's asking, okay, if you use this method to arrive at this belief, could it also lead you to wrong conclusions in other areas of your life?
It's forcing you to think about your own thinking, which is so meta.
I know, it's brilliant. So that's street epistemology in a nutshell. Now, our second source tackles this from a different perspective, moral diversity. And the main idea here is that we can't even begin to bridge divides unless we understand where our own moral compass comes from in the first place, like what shaped our sense of right and wrong.
Yeah, it's about acknowledging that morality isn't some fixed universal thing,
Not everyone has the same rule book.
Exactly. It's shaped by so many things, our culture, our personal psychology, philosophical ideas, even our own individual experiences. It's this complex web of influences.
And if we don't understand that complexity, it's no wonder we end up clashing with each other.
Right, because we're coming at it from completely different starting points.
So how can SE, this street epistemology, actually help us bridge these divides,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about these really charged moral issues where people dig their heels in? And the first one is about disarming defensiveness. They actually call it conversational jujitsu
Oh, I love that. It's a great analogy.
because it's not about a direct attack, is it?
No, it's more about redirecting the energy.
Exactly. So instead of saying you're wrong about X, you're shifting the focus to how they arrived at that belief.
Right. It's less confrontational. It takes the heat out of the conversation.
And it allows for more of a dialogue, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It becomes more of a collaborative exploration of their thinking.
And the next point is about sparking genuine curiosity. But the key here is that it has to be authentic. You can't just be faking it,
Yeah, people can spot that a mile away. It has to be real.
because when it is genuine, it can be incredibly contagious, and that can totally change the dynamic. Instead of two people butting heads, it becomes this shared journey of discovery.
And that's so powerful because when someone feels like you're genuinely interested in their perspective, they're more likely to open up.
Right. They're more likely to listen to you in return.
And it shows respect, which is huge. It's saying, I value your thoughts even if I don't agree with your conclusion.
Yeah, and that can go such a long way in building trust. The next benefit is illuminating the why behind the what. It's the idea that our beliefs aren't just these abstract things floating around in our heads.
Right, they're connected to our lives.
They're deeply intertwined with our identity, our experiences, our emotions.
Everything, yeah.
And SE can help us uncover those personal stories and values that underpin our beliefs. Like maybe someone's faith was something passed down through generations in their family.
And understanding that context can really foster empathy.
It's like seeing the human behind the belief, right?
Exactly. It's not just a label anymore. It's a person with a story. And even if you don't end up agreeing with their reasoning, you can at least understand why that belief might hold so much meaning for them.
And sometimes that's all it takes to build a bridge. Then there's this really cool idea about uncovering hidden common ground.
Oh yeah, I love this one.
So even if we disagree on a particular issue, if we dig deeper, we might find that we actually share some fundamental values.
It's like finding that unexpected connection point.
Or maybe we both struggle with the same cognitive biases.
Right, like we both fall prey to confirmation bias sometimes.
The source even gives this example. Maybe we both really value evidence, but we just have different ideas about what constitutes good evidence.
And recognizing those shared foundations can be really powerful.
It can bring people together, even if their conclusions are miles apart.
Yeah.
Because it's like, hey, we're not so different after all.
We're both trying to make sense of the world.
Exactly. The next point is all about planting seeds, not forcing immediate conversion.
Yes, this is key.
Because, let's be honest, no one likes to be cornered and told they're wrong.
No, it just makes you want to dig your heels in deeper.
Exactly. So SE isn't about trying to win an argument. It's about gently nudging someone towards self-reflection.
And creating a space for future dialogue.
It's about respecting that change takes time. It's a process.
And it often comes from within. You can't force someone to change their mind.
And finally, the source argues that S humanizes the other.
This is so crucial in today's world.
Because we're so quick to demonize people who hold different views, aren't we?
It's like we create these caricatures of them in our minds.
And SE forces us to actually engage with their reasoning process.
To see them as complex individuals, not just stereotypes.
And that simple act of respect can be a powerful antidote to all the negativity and division we see out there.
I agree. It's a reminder that even when we disagree, we're all human beings trying to figure things out.
Exactly. Okay, so we've seen how powerful street epistemology can be. Subscribe and we'll name the next cow after you.
Oh, wow.
Which is like, okay.
That's next level.
I mean, how many people are really clamoring to have a cow named after them?
That's a good question.
But it's like they're really trying to make you feel like part of the...
They're appealing to our vanity a little bit.
I guess so.
Like, who doesn't want a cow named after them?
Now let's dive into our second source, which gives us this really cool framework for understanding where those moral differences come from in the first place.
Right, because it's not like we're just born with these beliefs.
It's
Right?
not like they're hardwired into our DNA.
Definitely not.
So the source starts by painting this picture of just how diverse moral beliefs are across cultures. Like, what's considered right and wrong can vary wildly, depending on where you are in the world. And it references the work of Ruth Benedict.
Oh, yeah, she was a pioneer in cultural anthropology.
And her work showed how different societies can have these radically different ideas about morality. What's considered totally normal in one culture might be seen as completely taboo in another.
It really challenges our assumptions about what's universally right or wrong.
And it also talks about the work of Schwader, Mahapatra, and Miller, who identified these different ethical codes that societies operate by,
Right, like some cultures prioritize the needs of the community above all else,
while others might place more emphasis on individual autonomy.
or religious purity.
Yeah, exactly. And it highlights Jonathan Haidt's research, which showed how much emphasis people place on things like justice, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and how those values can differ drastically between individuals and groups.
His work is fascinating. It really shows how morality is this complex tapestry woven from all these different threads.
So, where do these moral differences actually come from? The source breaks it down into several key factors, starting with culture and social influences.
It's like the environment we grow up in, right?
Yeah, it's all about socialization.
The norms and values we're exposed to from a young age.
Our families, our education systems, the media we consume.
All those things shape our moral compass, often without us even realizing it.
It cites Benedict again, saying that we're basically trained to accept the moral code of our particular culture.
It becomes our default setting, our normal.
And it talks about Geert Hofstede's research, which I find so interesting. He looked at these fundamental differences between cultures, like individualism versus collectivism,
Yeah, that's a big one.
and how that can really shape our moral reasoning. Like in individualistic cultures, there's a strong emphasis on personal rights and freedoms.
While in collectivist cultures, the focus is more on the well-being of the group.
And that influences everything from how we view fairness to how we approach moral dilemmas.
Exactly. It shapes our entire moral landscape. And then it brings up Schwieder's work again, emphasizing how different cultures might prioritize different values.
Like community well-being, religious purity, individual autonomy. All those things can be in tension with each other.
And depending on which values a culture prioritizes, it shapes their entire moral code.
It's like choosing a different recipe, right?
It is, yeah. Different ingredients, different flavors.
So the next area is all about psychology and biology. This is where Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory comes in. Have you heard of this one?
Oh, yeah, it's a big one in moral psychology.
Yeah, it's so fascinating.
Yeah.
So he identified these 5 core moral foundations that seem to be present across cultures, although they're expressed differently.
Right. It's like the building blocks of morality.
And they are care harm, fairness cheating, loyalty betrayal, authority subversion, and sanctity degradation. Quite a mouthful.
They are, but they cover a lot of ground.
And what's really cool is how different groups, like liberals and conservatives, tend to prioritize these foundations differently.
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting findings of his research.
So liberals tend to place a higher value on care and fairness,
They're really concerned with issues of harm and injustice.
while conservatives tend to prioritize loyalty, authority, and sanctity.
They care about things like tradition, respect for authority, and maintaining social order.
And that can lead to some pretty big clashes in values.
It explains a lot of the political polarization we see today, actually. And the source also touches on evolutionary psychology, which is really interesting.
Like, how did these moral instincts even evolve in the first place?
Right, so it talks about things like kin selection.
Which is the idea that we're naturally inclined to protect our close relatives.
Makes sense from an evolutionary perspective.
And reciprocal altruism, which is basically the idea of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Cooperation. It's been essential for human survival.
And it also dives into the interplay between our gut feelings and our more reasoned thinking.
Like, do we make moral judgments based on emotions or logic?
And it references the work of Joshua Green and Haidt, who've done some really cool research in this area.
Yeah, they've shown how our intuitions often come first, and then we try to rationalize them afterward.
It's like our emotions are driving the car and our logic is just trying to figure out where we're going.
It's a wild ride.
The next area is philosophical and religious frameworks. So this looks at how different ethical theories like utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, all provide these different lenses for figuring out what's morally right.
Yeah, they're like different systems for making ethical decisions.
So utilitarianism, championed by John Stuart Mill, is all about maximizing happiness for the greatest number of people.
It's a very consequentialist view, focusing on the outcomes of our actions.
While deontology, associated with Immanuel Kant, is all about following universal moral rules, regardless of the consequences.
It's more about the principles behind our actions.
And virtue ethics, going all the way back to Aristotle, is about cultivating good character traits.
It's about becoming a virtuous person.
And then, of course, there are all the different religious traditions, which provide these often very detailed moral codes for their followers.
Right. They offer guidance on everything from how to treat others to how to live a good life.
So it's fascinating to see how these abstract, philosophical, and religious ideas can actually shape people's everyday moral beliefs.
They provide a framework for understanding right and wrong.
And finally, the source talks about personal experiences and identity.
Yeah, our own unique life stories.
The things we've been through, the groups we identify with.
All those things shape our moral sensitivities.
Like if someone has personally experienced injustice, they're probably going to have a much stronger sense of fairness than someone who hasn't.
Makes sense. Our experiences shape our perspectives.
And our social identities create loyalties to particular groups, which can sometimes clash with our broader moral principles.
It's that age-old tension between the individual and the group.
Okay, so we've looked at all these different sources of moral differences. It's quite a lot to take in, but it's so important to understand this complexity. Now, the source also goes into the cognitive factors that influence our moral judgments. And the first one is this idea that moral intuition often precedes conscious reasoning.
Yeah, it's that gut feeling we get about what's right or wrong.
And the source highlights Jonathan Haidt's social intuitionist model to explain this.
It's a really cool model.
It's the idea that our emotions often make us snap judgment first, and then our rational mind tries to catch up and justify it.
Haidt uses this great analogy of the elephant and the rider,
I love that analogy. So the elephant represents our intuitions, our gut feelings,
which are often very powerful.
and the rider is our conscious mind, our rational thinking.
But the rider isn't always in control.
No, the elephant often goes where it wants, and the rider is just trying to hold on for dear life.
Which explains why it's so hard to change people's minds, even when we present them with logical arguments.
Because their intuitions have already made up their minds.
And those are hard to shift.
Okay, the next cognitive factor is motivated reasoning. This is our tendency to seek out information that confirms what we already believe, especially when it comes to those deeply held moral beliefs.
We all do this to some extent.
It's like we're creating these echo chambers in our own mind.
But we only hear what we want to hear.
And it makes it so hard to be objective, doesn't it?
Yeah, because we're filtering out any information that challenges our worldview.
And then, of course, we have those pesky cognitive biases,
Oh yeah, they're always lurking.
like confirmation bias,
Yeah.
which is our tendency to favor information that confirms our existing beliefs.
We've talked about that one before.
It's a classic. And in-group bias, which is our tendency to favor our own group over others.
Which can lead to all sorts of problems.
And the fundamental attribution error, which is our tendency to attribute other people's behavior to their character.
While excusing our own bad behavior by blaming the situation.
It's like, they did that because they're a bad person, but I did that because I was having a bad day.
It's a classic double standard.
And all these biases can lead to huge misunderstandings, especially when it comes to moral issues.
They distort our perceptions of reality and make it hard to see things from other people's perspectives.
Your journey to deeper understanding starts here.
Okay.
NavigatingBeliefs.com. Sign up. It's free.
So it's not just learning, it's an adventure.
Yeah, like a quest for knowledge.
Makes it sound more exciting than just sitting down with a textbook.
Right. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored street epistemology, we've looked at the origins of moral differences, and we've even delved into some of the cognitive biases that can trip us up. But the big question is, how do we put all this together?
Right, how do we actually apply these concepts in our everyday lives?
So let's try to connect the dots. Let's say you're trying to have a conversation with someone who has a really strong loyalty foundation, as described in Haidt's moral foundations theory. How might that understanding influence the way you approach them with your SE questions?
That's a great question. So someone with a strong loyalty foundation is going to be very sensitive to anything that feels like a betrayal of their group.
Yeah, they're going to be fiercely loyal to their people.
So if you come in guns blazing, challenging their beliefs head on, it's likely to backfire.
they'll probably just get defensive and shut down.
Exactly. So a more effective approach might be to start by exploring the reasons behind their loyalty. Like, what does loyalty mean to you? Or what makes someone deserving of your loyalty?
It's about understanding their values before challenging their beliefs.
Exactly. And you can even explore the potential downsides of blind loyalty. Like, are there ever times when loyalty can be harmful?
It's about planting those seeds of doubt, but doing it in a way that respects their values.
And it's important to remember that you're not going to change their mind overnight.
Change takes time.
It's a process, so just be patient, keep asking questions, and try to build that rapport.
And who knows, you might even learn something new yourself along the way.
Absolutely. It's all about learning and growing together.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. It's really highlighted the importance of understanding different perspectives, even when we don't agree.
Yeah, it's about moving beyond those superficial disagreements and trying to see the world through each other's eyes.
And it's given us some really practical tools to do just that, like street epistemology and this framework for understanding where our moral beliefs come from.
These are tools we can use to have more productive conversations, build stronger relationships, and ultimately create a more understanding and compassionate world.
So for our listeners, we encourage you to think about how you might apply these principles in your own lives.
Yeah, give it a try.
Next time you find yourself in a disagreement, try asking some of those SE questions.
Like, how confident are you in that belief? Or what are your main reasons for holding it?
You might be surprised by what you learn, both about the other person and about yourself.
And take some time to reflect on your own moral beliefs.
Think about the different cultural, psychological, philosophical, and personal factors that have shaped your own moral compass.
Which of Hate's moral foundations resonate most strongly with you?
Exploring your own moral landscape is just as important as trying to understand the moral landscapes of others.
It's the foundation for empathy and understanding.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. In a world where we're constantly bombarded with different moral perspectives and where our own cognitive biases can lead us astray, how can we cultivate not just tolerance, but a deeper sense of intellectual humility? How can we commit to truly understanding the why behind differing views, even when they challenge our own? It's a big question, but hopefully this deep dive has given you some tools to start exploring it.
And if you're interested in learning more about these concepts, we highly recommend checking out the resources mentioned in the source materials. Peter Boghossian's book, Anthony Magnabosco's YouTube channel, the Street Epistemology International website, and all those fascinating academic works. There's a wealth of information out there waiting to be discovered.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.